And friends, today we will discuss regarding national water policy under water governance and water policy. India accounts for 18% of the world population and about 4% of the world's water resources and 2.4% of the land area. So our country has got about 4% of the world water resources and about 2.4% of the land area, and our population accounts to 18% of the world's population. There are further limits on utilizable quantities of water owing to uneven distribution over time and space. So there is a unequal distribution in the water resource because of it is unevenly distributed over space and time. In addition, there are challenges of frequent floods and droughts in one or the other part of the country. So we will be facing the challenges of floods as well as drought in one or other part of the country. Low consciousness about the scarcity of water and its life sustaining and economic value results in its mismanagement, wastage, and inefficient use, as also pollution and reduction of flows below minimum ecological needs. So we, so we have a low consciousness about the scarcity of water, that already we are under water stress conditions, and we are also having the low conscious about sustaining and economic value, and which results in mismanagement, wastage, and inefficient use, and also pollution and reduction of flows below the minimum ecological needs. We need to have a certain minimum flow in the water bodies for ecological needs. India has been successful in creating live water storage capacity about of 2.253 billion cubic meter so far, and it has also considered the ecological needs of river for the first time. A comprehensive policy framework is needed to ensure an integrated approach to water resource development with rational and equitable allocation of resources and giving priority to the poor and unserved. So there is a need of comprehensive policy framework with an integrated approach towards water resource development, and it is the approach should be rational and equitable allocation of resources, and it has to prioritize the poor and unserved. Effective policy frameworks recognize the longer term perspective of water as a finite and vulnerable resource and address the whole water cycle. So, an effective policy framework recognizes or it considers the longer perspective of the water as it is a finite and vulnerable resource. So, this is most important because water is a finite and vulnerable resource, and the approach should address the whole water cycle. A national water sector strategy should state the government's objectives and the methods to be employed to achieve them. So, a national water strategy should have an objective and methods to be employed to achieve the above goals. It will include investment and project development guidelines. The objective of the national water policy is to take cognizance of the existing situation, to propose a framework for creation of a system of laws and institutions, and for a plan of action with a unified national perspective. So the national water policy takes into account the existing situation, and it proposes a framework for creation of a system of laws and institutions with a perspective of unified national plan of action. National Development Council observed that a climate should be created in which national water plans are prepared keeping in view the national perspective as well as state and regional needs. So the National Development Council, which met during 1982, observed that there needs an enable environment to create national water plans with keeping in mind the national perspective as well as the state and regional needs. Accordingly, Government of India by resolution dated 10th March 1983 set up National Water Resource Council. So in 1983, National Water Resource Council was established. The Prime Minister of India is the chairman of the NWRC and the Ministers of Water Resources is the vice chairman. Members comprise of Minister of State for Water Resources, the Union Minister or Ministers of State few related central from a few related central ministries, Chief Minister of all the states, and Lieutenant Governors or administrators for all the Union territories. And Secretary, Ministry of Water Resource is the Secretary of the NWRC. This composition makes the NWRC the highest level policy making body in the country on any issue. So NWRC is the highest level policy making body in the country. During water policy consultation process, most of the states have indicated that they need a greater push from the center to carry forward water sector reforms. So the states have expressed their view that the center should give more emphasis on carrying forward the water sector reforms. Consider its critical importance in national development. Water needs to be managed with a national perspective based on the acceptance of few common fundamental principles as a community resource held by state under public trust doctrine to achieve food security, livelihood, and equitable and sustainable development for all. So, the water resource development should be considered with a national perspective and it should be based on acceptance of a few common fundamental principles as a community resource, and treating water as a community resource we should have a common fundamental principle, and and these principles should be accepted by the state under public trust doctrine to achieve food security, livelihood, and equitable and sustainable development for all. National water policy is formulated by the Ministry of Water Resources of the Government of India to govern the planning and development of water resources and their optimum utilization. So, National water policy is formulated by the Ministry of Water Resources of Government of India for the development of water resource and their optimum utilization. The first national water policy was adopted in September 1987. It was reviewed and updated in 2002 and later in 2012. So the first NWP was accepted in 1987 and it was reviewed and updated in 2002 as well as in 2012. The major provisions under the policy are envisages to establish a standard national information system with a network of data banks and databases. So the NWP establishes a standardized national information system with network of data banks. Resource planning and recycling for providing maximum availability. So water resource has to be planned, also it has to be recycled for providing maximum availability. To give importance to the impact of projects on human settlements and environment. So an importance is to be given for the impacts of the projects on human settlements as well as the environment. Guidelines for the safety of storage, dams and other water related structures. So the guidelines are issued under NWP for the safety of the storage dams as well as other water related structures. Regulate exploitation of groundwater, setting water allocation priorities in the following order. So the priorities of the water allocations are to be done in the following order, that is drinking water, irrigation, hydropower, navigation, then industrial and other uses. The water rates for surface water and groundwater should be rationalized with due regard to the interest of small and marginal farmers. See, keeping in view the interest of the small and marginal farmers, the rationalized tariffs for surface and groundwater should be fixed. The policy also deals with participation of farmers and voluntary agencies, water quality, water zoning, conservation of water, flood and drought management, erosion, etc. So So the NWC also makes a provision for the participation of the farmers and voluntary organizations in the sectors of water quality, water zoning, conservation of water, flood and drought management, erosion, etc. The NWC is adopted by the National Water Resource Council, which was established in March 1983. There is also a National Water Board, which is chaired by the Secretary, Ministry of Water Resource. Its members include Secretaries of the Union Ministries of Agriculture, Rural Development, Urban Development, Surface Transport, Environment and Forest, Planning and Science and Technology, Chairman, Central Water Commission, and Chief Secretaries of all the states and union territories. Its member secretary is the member for water planning and projects of the CWC. The NWB reports to NWRC. So NWRC, that is National Water Resource Council, is the highest body chaired by the Prime Minister of India. So it may be difficult for this NWRC to meet often for decision making. So another board, National Water Board, is, is also set up, which is chaired by the Secretary, Ministry of Water Resources, and the members consisting as said in the said earlier. For both the 1987 and 2002 national water policies, the first drafts were prepared in-house by the Water Resource Ministry. So the drafting of the NWP during 1987 and which was again reviewed in 2002 were done by the Ministry of Water Resources. Consultation with the civil society and stakeholders were of the most part negligible. So during these two reviews, the consultation with the civil society and stakeholders were not taken into account. Not surprisingly, both the policies were severely criticized by many stakeholders for the absence of any meaningful consultations. So that is why both the NWPs were criticized mainly by the stakeholders for not considering their consultation in the process. Stung by these widespread and sustained criticism, when the 2002 NWP was due for a revision, the Water Ministry went out of its way to hold wide-ranging and structured consultation with the elected representatives, civil society actors interested in water issues and other stakeholders. So during 2012, when the NWP was to be reviewed, so because of the widespread and sustained criticism during 2002, the Water Ministry went out of its way to hold wide-ranging consultations with the elected representatives, civil society actors interested in water issues, and other stakeholders. So the NWP, which was reviewed in 2002, was again put for revision during 2012, and a drafting committee was constituted comprising S.R. Hashim, former member, Planning Commission, and former chairman of Union Public Service Commission. This committee was supported by a team of officers from the Water Ministry, including the CWC, Central Groundwater Board, National Institute of Hydrology, Planning Commission, and National Rainfed Area Authority. These officers were not members of the drafting committee, they played only a supporting role. The summaries of the consultation meetings were made available to the drafting committee. The first draft of NWP 2012 was made available on the website of MoWR on 31st January 2012. Comments were invited from the people at large. So the draft NWP was published on the website of Ministry of Water Resource, and the comments were invited by the people. Finally, the draft was considered by the council during its sixth meeting held on 28th December 2012. So in 2012 December, the draft was accepted. This concluded an extensive consultation and drafting process that extended over 2 years. Unlike its two earlier counterparts, NWP 2012 went through an extensive consultation process with relevant stakeholders. So the NWP 2012 consider the relevant opinions of the all the stakeholders which were involved in the process. Public policies on water resource needs to be governed by certain basic principles. The basic principles are integrated perspective, considering local, regional, state, and national context, having an environmentally sound basis, keeping in view the human, social, and economic needs. So, first it should have an integrated perspective consideration on the scales of local, regional, state, and national, and also it should be based on environmental factors, keeping in view the human, social, and economic needs. Principle of equity and social justice in use and allocation of water. So the water is to be allocated based on the principle of equity and social justice. Good governance through transparent, informed decision making, meaningful, intensive participation, transparency, and accountability should guide decision making and regulation of water resources. So the process should involve the accountability and transparency in the decision making processes. Water needs to be managed as a common pool community resource held by the state under public trust doctrine to achieve food security, support livelihood, and ensure equitable and sustainable development for all. So water is to be treated as a community resource, and it is held by the states or state governments under the public trust doctrine, and the purpose is to achieve food security, support livelihood, and ensure equitable and sustainable development for all. Water is essential for sustenance of ecosystem, and therefore minimum ecological need should be given due consideration. So since water is the very essential for sustenance of the ecosystem, minimum ecological need should be given due consideration. Safe water for drinking and sanitation should be considered as preemptive needs. So safe water for drinking and sanitation are the first priority, or they are the preemptive, and they are considered as the preemptive needs, followed by high priority allocation for other basic domestic needs. So the first priority for the allocation is to be given for drinking and sanitation purpose. Achieving food security, supporting sustenance agriculture and minimum ecosystem needs. Available water after meeting the above needs should be allocated in a manner to promote its conservation and efficient use. So, after allocating for the above purpose, then the balanced water can be used or allocated to other sectors in a manner to promote its conservation and efficient use. All the elements of water cycle, that is evapotranspiration, precipitation, runoff, river, lake, soil, moisture, and groundwater, sea, etc., are interdependent, and the basic hydrological unit is the river basin. It should be considered as the basic hydrological unit for planning. So, as already we have discussed, the basic hydrological unit the for the above approaches is the basin, river basin. Given the limits of enhancing the availability of utilizable water resources and increased variability in supplies due to climate change, meeting the future needs will depend more on demand management, and hence it needs to be given the priority, especially through evolution, especially through evolving an agriculture system which economizes on water use and maximizes value from water, bringing in maximum efficiency in use of water and avoiding wastages. So, given the limits, because water is a finite resource, and enhancing the availability of utilizable water resources, and within that limit only we are supposed to enhance the availability of the water for utilizable purposes, and in the context of climate change. So we have to meet the future needs depending on the demand management, and hence this needs to be given a priority. So it needs to be given a priority of allocation, keeping in mind the limits, and especially it has to be done by evolving an agriculture system which economizes on water use and maximizes value from water. So we should have an agriculture system which economizes the water use and maximize the value of water, and bringing in maximum efficiency in use of water and avoiding wastages. So we should bring the efficiency in the use of water by avoiding wastages. Water quality and quantity are interlinked and need to be managed in an integrated manner consistent with broader environmental management approaches inter alia, including the use of economic incentives and penalties to reduce pollution and wastages. So, water quality and quantity are interlinked and it should be managed with an integration of both and with a broader environmental management approach, and it should be linked also including use of economic incentives and also by penalizing to reduce the pollution of wastages. The impact of climate change on water resource availability must be factored into water management related decisions. So the impact of the climate change are to be considered in the water management related decision. Water using activities need to be regulated keeping in mind the local geoclimatic and hydrological situations. So the water sector usage should be regulated keeping in mind the local geoclimatic and hydrological situation. So these are the steps involved in a policy process, or it is called as a policy life cycle. So there should be first a public agenda, then it leads to policy agenda, which leads to policy formulation and policy implementation and control and enforcement and policy evaluation. So policy evaluation in turn leads to re- review the policy or the policy formulations. Thank you.